Blackwell.
My Lady, this afternoon we begin the final element of our public hearings, which will focus on bereavement and the bereaved. And our first witness is Dr. Samuel Royston, who will give evidence on behalf of the UK Commission on Bereavement. May he be sworn, please?
Repeat after me. I do solemnly,
Sincerely and truly
declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Lovely,
Thank you. Two mixed.
Thank you for coming to join us, Dr. Royston.
Will you give us your full name, please?
Yeah, my name's Dr. Samuel Peter Royston.
Thank you. You should have before you a copy of your witness statement, which bears our reference INQ 000657845. Please, can you confirm that that is the statement which you have provided on behalf of the UK Commission on Bereavement?
It is.
And that the contents are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
They are.
Thank you very much. You are currently the Executive Director for Research and Policy at Marie Curie, and you previously have held the position of Director of Research and Policy at Marie Curie. Prior to that, you served as Director of Policy and Research at the Children's Society. You hold a Directorate of Philosophy and a Master's degree in Social Policy from the University of York and a Bachelor's degree in Philosophy from the University of Cambridge. Is that right?
A Doctorate of Philosophy rather than
I was
Directorate.
about to correct.
So sorry, a Doctorate of Philosophy, yes. You're giving evidence in your capacity as chair of the steering group of the UK Commission on Bereavement, is that right?
That's right.
And you held that position from June 2021 until October of 2022. In preparing the statement that you've given to Module 10, you have consulted with colleagues and you have relied upon your own knowledge and recollections and the input from other members of the UKCB steering group, and you've set out the history of the organisation and also the work that it has done during the course of COVID and beyond. So, the UK Commission on Bereavement didn't have a legal status, but it was established to investigate recent experiences in the United Kingdom and to make recommendations for improving bereavement support. Is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
It comprised 16 commissioners, including a chair, Dame Sarah Mullally, who was then Bishop of London, now Archbishop of Canterbury, and a series of commissioners, including at least one from each of the UK nations. Is that right? And they included community leaders, experts with a professional understanding of bereavement, journalists with an interest in bereavement issues, political influencers with experience of securing policy change, and individuals who had experienced bereavement during the course of COVID. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the steering group, which supported its work, was chaired by you. And who else was on the steering group, please, Dr. Royston?
The other charities which established the UK Commission on Bereavement, so that was Marie Curie, ourselves, National Bereavement Alliance and Childhood Bereavement Network, Independent Age and Cruise Bereavement Support.
Thank you. Between its launch in 2021 and the publication of its report, Bereavement is Everyone's Business, which we will look at throughout the course of your evidence this afternoon, the commissioners met online or in person about every 6 weeks. Is that right?
Yeah, it's about that.
And the role of the commissioners was varied, but it included attending the meetings, leading oral evidence sessions, reviewing reports and making decisions about the recommendations. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
And it was guided at every stage by what you describe as a lived experience advisory forum, known by the acronym LEAF. Tell us what LEAF did, please, Dr. Royston.
The Lived Experience Advisory Forum was an It was advisory, so they weren't members of the Commission, although we had one member who provided a contact between the LEAF and the Commission, so was also a commissioner.
Yes.
And they were it was made up of 14 people who had been bereaved within the previous 3 years, and they helped to guide the scope, priorities and recommendations of the Commission.
Thank you. You tell us at paragraph 14 what the aims and objectives of the Commission was. You say that it was to review the experiences of and support available for people affected by bereavement through and beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, and to make recommendations to key decision makers, including the UK government and each devolved government, in order to improve support for bereaved people in each nation in the UK. And its three objectives were these. One, to collect evidence, including by hosting an open public call for written evidence on bereavement experience and support through COVID-19, and holding oral evidence sessions for people with lived experience of bereavement through the pandemic and also key experts. Two, to produce and publish findings on experiences of bereavement through the pandemic, including recommendations for change. And three, to make the case for change, meeting with key decision makers to bring about improvements to support and for bereaved people through and beyond the pandemic. You say at paragraph 16, bereavement is a universal human experience which will affect all of us in the course of our lives. However, many of the challenges facing bereaved people were brought into sharp focus during the course of the pandemic. What sort of figures did your Commission receive and discover in terms of the increase in bereavement during the course of the pandemic?
We estimated that there were an estimated 6.8 million bereavements in the United Kingdom over the course of 2020 and 2021 alone, and that was an estimated additional 750,000 compared with the average between 2015 and 2019. Thank
you. At paragraphs 22 to 31, you set out the demographic distribution of respondents to the written consultation. I won't ask you to set that out here, save and except to say that you recorded distribution in terms of characterisations such as age, gender, ethnicity, nationality, respondents' first language, religion and sexual orientation. Is that right?
That's correct.
And was the data available in relation to some of those characterisations better than others? I think we'll come to look at the data in a moment and to see what the gaps were in terms of what was capable of being recorded. In terms of oral evidence, the Commission held 8 sessions on different topics and a series of round-table events bringing together key stakeholders. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
And you say at paragraph 33 that themes and findings from all strands of evidence were then synthesised in the report narrative, and the structure and chapters for the report were decided on collectively by researchers, members of the steering group and commissioners after careful consideration of the key themes that emerged through the analysis.
Yes, that's correct.
You also mention in your statement something called the B-COVID survey. Was that does that stand for Bereavement During COVID Study?
Yes.
And was that led by Dr. Emily Harrop, who is a research fellow at the University of Cardiff and who has provided a witness statement to this inquiry, and also Professor Lucy Selman, Professor of Palliative and End-of-Life Care at the University of Bristol?
That's correct. And Lucy and Emily were also represented on the steering group for the UKCB.
Thank you very much. Well, let's take a look at the report, please. It's at INQ 000349021. We can see the UK Commission on Bereavement 2022 report, Bereavement is Everyone's Business. And if we go to page 5, please. Thank you. We can see that the COVID-19 pandemic has not only exacerbated challenges around bereavement, it has also spotlighted this universal human experience and presented a rare opportunity to reflect as a society on how well equipped we are to support people through a bereavement and how we can work together to improve that support both now and in the future. And you say here, working in partnership with a number of UK voluntary sector organisations and with researchers, doctors Emily Harrop and Lucy Selman, who led an academic study on bereavement during the pandemic, an independent UK commission on bereavement through and beyond COVID-19 was established in June 2021 to investigate this key question in all 4 nations of the UK. And then, may we go to page 15, please? We can see that one of the sections was findings and recommendations. The impact of bereavement is described there as being a very lonely place to be. And if we can, thank you very much, just highlight those bubbles and the paragraph following, we can see that somebody aged 13 to 15 told the Commission, it's quite hard at times, it really is like a roller coaster. You could be feeling good one minute, then you have a big moment where all of your emotions come out. And then this, almost all of us will experience bereavement in our life and each of us will experience it differently. A bereavement can be one of the most profound upheavals that any one of us faces. As well as the direct emotional impact, a bereavement can create a wide range of practical challenges which a bereaved person has to face while trying to cope with their grief. And then if we can highlight from the following page, please. Thank you very much. Many respondents talked about feeling overwhelmed by sadness and devastation. Respondents described this in a variety of ways, including feeling lost or numb, feeling like their world had fallen apart, and some likened it to a bad dream, saying they didn't want to carry on. And then these quotes, it's awful, draining, and it takes control of your life. That from a teenage person. And then respondents of all ages described the strength and changeability of their feelings, which could be overwhelming and feel out of control. The feeling of being on a roller coaster with emotions emerging unexpectedly could make grief hard to manage over the course of the day. Specific triggers could be a problem, but these weren't always predictable. And then finally, from a woman aged 51 to 60 whose son died of COVID-19, she said, I felt like I was drowning. The waves of grief hit me so hard. These quotes are chosen, are they not, to represent the wealth of evidence that was collected by the Commission during the course of its work?
They are.
Yes, thank you. We can take that down, please. I'd like to now ask you, Dr. Royston, about the Commission's 8 principles established for change. And could we put up, please, 000349021 and have a look at page 13, going back to the report. Thank you very much. So 8 principles for change, and I'd like you to talk us through each of these, please. Principle 1, I am supported by my family, my friends, and the communities around me. What lies behind principle 1?
Well, first, just to say about all of the statements, they're a set of I statements, and that was chosen for a reason. That the key question for the Commission was to set out what needs to be done to improve support for the future.
Yes.
And we wanted to set it out as the things which the Commission wanted all bereaved people to be able to say. So each of the statements is an I statement in order to respond to that challenge. And the first thing that we heard when we analysed the evidence, and one of the most central, was about the importance of support by family, by friends, by wider community settings in order to support people through bereavement. And some of the statements you illustrated, so that really struck home so powerfully, were about the sense of isolation through bereavement. And really this was about the need of treating bereavement as something which is a shared experience across a community and something which requires support from not just one or two people, but by the whole community surrounding the person who's been faced bereavement.
Thank you for explaining that to us, because, of course, not everybody is lucky enough to have a family and a large group of friends. So it's important to understand that community support is also something that's important in this regard.
Absolutely.
Yes, all right. Thank you very much. Moving on to Principle 2, I am sensitively supported by my school, college or workplace during my bereavement. What lies behind that principle, please?
This was in some ways really building on the first, but recognising there were some settings which were particularly important and came out through the course of the Commission as particularly important and often neglected places for provision of bereavement support. So for young people, the importance of their school or their college setting in terms of the way in which bereavement support is provided. And that related, incidentally, not just to the point at which a bereavement had happened, but making sure that that early education about grief and bereavement was embedded for all children and young people in the school or college setting. And similarly, we heard too often from people in the workplace that issues around bereavement or grief weren't discussed, weren't engaged with, and the importance of having a supportive workplace in terms of responding to those issues to someone's bereavement experience.
Thank you. Principle number 3, I feel well supported before and during the death and feel confident that my relative received appropriate and compassionate care.
Yeah, so this just relates specifically to the time of death and the importance of support through the time of death, including prior to the point at which the person died. So effective palliative care and support for people living with terminal illness, including support for their family members, being crucial to people's bereavement experiences was one of the things that we heard, but really relating in closely to the support that's received around that point of mortality and its really profound impact on the longer course of bereavement for somebody who's faced it.
Thank you. Principle 4, the things I must do after death are simple and straightforward.
Yeah, I'm at an already difficult time. Many newly bereaved people are faced with huge volumes of practical tasks, of paperwork, which the Commission found to be complex, sometimes duplicative, often very difficult and poorly supported. We asked for, one of the things the Commission found was that there were changes that were needed in that space in order to ensure that processes were kept as simple and as supportive as possible for people who have been bereaved.
Thank you. Principle 5, the professionals I am in contact with at all stages through my bereavement are compassionate and helpful.
Yeah, there was a recognition here that too often the responsibility for providing bereavement support would be felt to be on just a very small number of professionals with a specialism in that space, and recognising that there are numerous points of interaction with various different organisations and businesses that people experience after a bereavement, from registering a death to sorting out financial affairs through to organising a funeral. And this was to recognise those that wide set of points of contact and ensuring the need to ensure that support is provided for all of them.
Thank you. Principle 6, I have access to an affordable and meaningful funeral.
Something that came out very clearly through the work of the Commission was the importance of an affordable and meaningful funeral for people's bereavement experiences, and that too often in particular, challenges of affording a decent funeral service were created particular challenges through the course of the pandemic, and that was exacerbating a challenge that had already existed in society, in truth.
Thank you. And in addition to funerals, respondents mentioned other forms of memorialisation. And let's just look at page 104, please, in this report. Thank you. This is the section that deals with principle number 6. I have access to an affordable and meaningful funeral. But if we turn to page 106, and could we highlight, please, other forms of memorialisation towards the bottom of the page? Thank you. In addition to funerals, respondents mentioned the value of other forms of memorialisation. They described how sharing stories, tributes, music, artwork and shared interests allowed a powerful alternative form of expression and remembrance and provided a lasting bond with the person who died. Examples shared in the evidence included the National Day of Reflection to remember all who died during the COVID-19 pandemic and Walls of Remembrance. And there we can see some quotes. Common music and interests I shared with my father helped. Then from a participant in Northern Ireland at your round table there, people express themselves in many other ways. Some of the other initiatives that exist currently and memory stones and walls of remembrance. And then finally, other organisations have provided spaces where people can come together to share stories, do tributes, artwork, music, etc. Beyond having a funeral, respondents identified a number of key factors which supported them to have meaningful funerals and last rites, including advanced planning, financial support, and using culturally specific providers. And do we see there, Dr. Royston, that how somebody chooses to memorialise their loved one is or can be very personal to them. And it's important to remember that whilst there are some very formal ways for that to take place, it's important to remember that there might be other informal and more personal ways to do that.
It absolutely can, and that came out very clearly through the work of the Commission.
Thank you. If we could go back to the principles, please, back to page 13 and look at principle number 7. I feel insecure in my home and have the right, I feel secure in my home and have the right financial support. What lies behind that, please?
Yes, so that was a recognition that for many people who face bereavement, one thing that came out of the Commission was that too many people were facing eviction or insecurity in their home as a result of that bereavement, and a lot of that relating back to their financial security and their ability to pay their bills. So making sure that people had that financial security in place and that security of tenure, really, really important for people's bereavement experiences.
Thank you. And finally, Principle 8, I can easily find and access the right emotional bereavement support that recognises my needs and circumstances.
Yeah, and an important part of this is for my circumstances, because while good support from friends and relatives is sufficient for most people who are bereaved, and we didn't, one of the key things that the conclusions the Commission came to was about the need to avoid over-medicalising bereavement experiences. Nonetheless, some people will need more formal emotional support, and raised, the Commission highlighted a range of issues with the current levels of support that were available where people needed it.
Thank you. I know that you then go on to set out a number of initiatives that are underway in the UK, and you list progress and improvements. I'm going to come back to that at the end of your evidence, if I may. But before we look at that, you tell us about disparities in bereavement experiences, and this is something about which the inquiry has already heard some evidence and is going to hear more evidence over the course of this week. You helpfully split these disparities into 9 headings in your report, and we're going to look at those individually, if we may now. The first is national or regional differences. Let's have a look at your witness statement, please, which is at INQ 000657845. And I'm going to ask you, please, Dr. Royston, to talk us through a series of tables that appear here in your report. This table, Table 1, shows reported bereavement difficulties related to the pandemic. What do we see here?
This is about the bereavement difficulties that people reported related to the pandemic, and shows a range of the different challenges that people faced at that time. As you can see, the most frequent, and it relates back to a previous question, most frequent challenge was around difficulties of not being able to have the funeral that people desired, shortly followed by issues around social isolation, and related to that, of course, limited contact with their loved ones before they died.
Yes.
But you can see that we also saw a range of other challenges emerging as well, including specific fears around COVID-19 and the experiences of the pandemic, problems being unable to escape some of the media coverage and the constant reflection back to the pandemic, and also that kind of issue around lack of support from professionals as well, where it was needed.
Thank you. Now, in terms of any regional differences, did your research in relation to Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and the 9 English regions which you looked at, in fact show you that there was no significant difference to be found around the UK, that the picture was very much similar?
Yes, I think it did, yes.
Thank you. Could we look now, please, at Table 2, which I think is on the next page. Thank you very much. This shows the incidence of administrative difficulties experienced through bereavement. What do we see here?
So, as well as some of the emotional challenges that people experience through the course of the bereavement through the pandemic, people also talked about some of the challenges that people faced with what's sometimes called death administration, some of the challenges around kind of processes and paperwork associated with the death. So a big issue coming out from that was the challenges of sorting out about people's financial affairs, so closing bank accounts, dealing with mortgages or things like that. Came out very, very strongly. And many people talked about receiving often multiple letters addressed to the wrong person and that kind of issue following someone's death. But it wasn't limited to that. Many people also talked about specific challenges related to registering a death. And making sure that happened, difficulties with funeral arrangements, and of course other practical responsibilities. And one of the big challenges that came out was that often a lot of these issues were things that occurred at the same time. Right. So rather than being able to, have the time to pace themselves through a very emotionally turbulent time, people were finding that actually they had to sort out all of these things all at once.
So thinking about pacing, could you slow down a bit?
Sorry, my lady.
Thank you, my lady. So really that was compounding the situation because they were having to deal with more than one issue at the same time. Yeah,
and through a very emotionally turbulent time. So often these things having to be sorted out within a matter of, days or weeks following the death.
Thank you. You also collected evidence on the support that bereaved participants received from employers and education providers, and this is set out at Table 3, which shows the ratings of support received from employers. So that was quite varied, was it not?
It was, and we heard from many people through the course of the Commission who said that actually their employer supported them really well. One of the things that really stuck out about this area of evidence was how variable it was, and some people saying got really good support, other people saying actually the support was awful.
Yeah, thank you. And Table 4 at page 30 shows ratings of support from educational settings. That looks as if it's fairly standard across the board, doesn't it?
Yeah, again, very variable.
Yeah.
Just to note, that's a survey of adults. There was also some findings related to children and young people, but this is related to
adults. Thank you for pointing that out. And then finally, Table 5, respondents who wanted to access some sort of formal support, and this shows barriers to accessing that support?
Yeah, I think the thing that sticks out most perhaps from this table is that many people felt that the support they needed wasn't available. So a third of people saying the support that they needed wasn't available.
Thank you. Is it right that in the oral evidence sessions that you held, there were some regional disparities highlighted? For example, within hospice services, there were differences in terms of whether or not local bereaved families could access their bereavement support services regardless of care settings.
There were particular kind of issue. I'm not sure whether to call it a place-based difference, but things like the level of rurality of an area are affecting the kinds of support that would be available.
Thank you. So that deals with national and regional differences. The second area that I want to look at now, please, in relation to disparities is qualifications or education level. And at paragraph 185, you talk about the B-COVID analysis, and you say that in the B-COVID analysis relating to end-of-life and pandemic bereavement experiences, participants with higher levels of qualification were significantly more likely to report being well supported by healthcare professionals immediately after the death and contacted by the hospital or care provider following the death. Are you able to help us with what might lie behind that difference?
Well, on one of the previous the tables, you'll see that one of the reasons people reported barriers in accessing bereavement support was not knowing what support was available or how to access it. So abilities of people to be able to self-advocate and to challenge, in some circumstances, a lack of bereavement support might be one factor which contributed.
Thank you. Thirdly, gender. You say at paragraph 188, again looking to the B-COVID analysis, that in relation to the end-of-life and pandemic bereavement experiences, the effects of gender identity were generally weak, although the likelihood of reported limited contact with other close relatives or friends after the death was found to be significantly higher for women compared to men. And again, is there any thought lying behind that why that difference might be?
Well, one part of the analysis, I understand, showed that men, in some circumstances, lean towards a preference for more informal and practical support, but could also find it difficult to talk about grief and feelings. Obviously, that's a generalisation, but in some circumstances. So it might be that actually the lack of some of those appropriate forms of support to respond to the ways in which men wanted to talk about issues of grief and bereavement were particularly lacking.
Thank you. Next, age. You say at paragraph 191 that regarding sources of informal support, those in the 31 to 40 age group received significantly more informal support than those in other age groups. Again, any thoughts on why that might be?
No, I think it's quite difficult to say exactly why it was that that there were variations, though possibly, again, something about knowledge and understanding of bereavement support services available.
Yes. Number 5, sexual orientation. At paragraph 195, you say that in the Commission's analysis, sexual orientation had a small effect on one support outcome. Those who had an LGBTQ plus identity were more likely to believe that support wouldn't provide the help that they needed, and that sexual orientation was not included in the B-COVID analysis of end-of-life or grief outcomes due to missing data. You go on to say that pre-pandemic research evidence presented to the Commission identified high levels of complicated grief amongst both bereaved partners of same and different gender couples, but significantly higher levels of psychological distress among same gender bereaved partners. Is that right?
That's right, yes.
Was there a known lack of appropriate bereavement support for LGBTQ plus people before the pandemic?
There is some evidence of that. So a survey of bereavement services identified sexual minority groups. 27% of bereavement services identified sexual minority groups as having unmet needs before the pandemic. So it might be that it does relate to an exacerbation of the paucity of services prior to that point.
And in your view, does that reflect existing health and social inequalities going into the pandemic?
In my view, yes. I think that a lot of that distress, that absence of support was linked to isolation, fear of discrimination, lack of recognition of relationships was a big issue, or fear of lack of recognition of relationships, which could all be contributing factors which may well have existed prior to the pandemic.
Thank you. Now, in terms of missing data, does the missing data on LGBTQ+ in the B-COVID analysis that we've just read of end-of-life outcomes reflect, in your view, the need for additional research in respect of the impact on LGBTQ+ communities?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say.
And are you able to tell us whether or not there's been any progress since the pandemic in respect of the provision of specialist support for LGBTQ+ people or an additional gathering of data?
It's not an area I'm particularly conscious of, though I may be unaware of something.
All right. 6, ethnicity. Now, you tell us at paragraph 198 that there was no statistically significant differences relating to ethnicity found on any of the outcomes, either by the Commission's research or by the B-COVID analysis. However, the B-COVID survey of bereavement support providers found that around half of services, that's 49%, identified minority ethnic communities as groups with unmet needs who were not accessing services before the pandemic. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. Let's just look, please, on this point at the bereavement roundtable. It's at INQ 000 588201. We can see there the report. Thank you. And go to page 6. And highlight the paragraphs in the middle of the page. Thank you very much. So the respondents at the round table said that some bereaved people, in particular in households where English was not widely understood, did not know about some or all of the pandemic restrictions and guidance. Mind, who provided mental health support to bereaved people during the pandemic, highlighted examples from Haredi Jewish communities and some Asian communities with whom they work, where people did not understand why they could not conduct funerals in line with their usual cultural or religious practices. And Mind said some communities struggled to understand why they couldn't run funerals as per their cultural norms. There was a lack of thought and understanding about how the impact on different cultural ways of bereavement was happening. It led to a white, Western understanding of COVID-19 restrictions. And is that evidence also reflected in what the Commission found?
I think the Commission found that certainly that there were issues of disrupted cultural and faith-based mourning rituals, such as rapid burials, Muslim body washing, Jewish sitting Shiva, and the Caribbean 9 nights due to pandemic restrictions, but also additional challenges, including deaths of relatives overseas and restrictions on the inability to travel and delayed opportunities to grieve collectively, all came up very clearly within the UKCB's work.
Thank you. You also say at paragraph 200 that participants also described the emotional and psychological impacts of the disproportionately high COVID death rates within minority ethnic communities. And you say multiple close bereavements within families and communities was not only highly distressing, but also contributed to an enhanced sense of vulnerability and anxiety relating to the health risks of the disease, as well as feelings of anger and injustice at the health and social inequalities that were exposed by the pandemic. Do you agree that the impacts described by you at paragraph 202, where you talk about difficulties in minority ethnic communities accessing formal bereavement support, highlight the need for greater levels of tailored bereavement support for communities?
Absolutely. And again, something which there is some evidence was in existence pre-pandemic. So 49% of bereavement services identified minority ethnic communities as having unmet needs before the pandemic as well. So particular challenges there.
Thank you. Do you agree that the impacts described highlight the need for do you agree that the lack of appropriate bereavement support reflect the existing health inequalities which ethnic minority people were feeling going into the pandemic, and were those exacerbated during the pandemic?
Absolutely agree.
And has there been any progress since the pandemic in respect of the provision of specialist support for minority ethnic communities?
It's hard to say about provision of support. In terms of understanding of support, there has been NIHR-funded research study on equitable bereavement support across ethnic groups, which I think will provide some further really important evidence into this space. But in terms of progress, in terms of the provision of support, I would hesitate to say.
Thank you. Number 7, people with learning disabilities. You tell us at paragraph 206 that the Commission respondents highlighted specific challenges facing people with learning disabilities, including that they are not always told that friends or relatives have died or may not be allowed to attend their funerals. And on this topic, may we go back to the round table, please, and to have a look at the top of page 8 and onto page 9. Thank you. Some groups added to the round table that it was particularly difficult for people with a learning disability to understand the death of loved ones and associated restrictions on end-of-life rituals during the pandemic, given the changes to end-of-life rituals. Thank you. And then if we look to the bottom of the page, thank you. Some representatives spoke about people with a learning disability or neurological condition not being prioritised when families were deciding who could attend funerals, as they were less likely to understand the restrictions in place or how to follow them. And Cruse Bereavement Support Scotland, who are going to be giving evidence just after you this afternoon, told the round table if they have a learning disability, they didn't understand what was happening in the wider world with the complexity of a bereavement. Those people were pushed out of the restricted numbers for funerals. Thank you. In your view, Dr. Royston, did disabled people experience disenfranchised grief, including that people with learning disabilities, as we have seen, had particular difficulties in understanding the changes that were happening?
Certainly in the case of people with learning disabilities. And I think that was, in some ways, exacerbated some of the challenges that some people with learning disabilities may have faced with understanding processes of bereavement were also exacerbated by not being told.
Yes.
And not having the efforts made to communicate experiences of bereavement to them as a result of fears that they wouldn't understand or kind of won't be able to engage. So a kind of a double pressure, as it were.
And did you find that disabled people with additional support needs, such as hearing or sight loss, were left particularly unsupported?
Well, I don't think we specifically found that through the UK Commission on Bereavement work, though I am conscious that other pieces of work evidence did find that. Apologies if I'm wrong about this, but other pieces of work did find that, such as, for example, use of PPE, creating restrictions for or making it more difficult to communicate for people with hearing difficulties, for example.
Yeah, thank you. Did disabled people who were clinically extremely vulnerable experience a disproportionate impact on the grieving and bereavement process from being unable to attend funerals and other mourning rituals, even once restrictions were lifted?
I think that would be fair to say.
Thank you. And finally on this topic, you refer at paragraphs 87 and 88 to death certification and death certification reforms and the link to complex or complicated grief, and also reflect upon the coronial procedures. Do you agree that post-death processes, including the investigation and accountability of aspects of a death, are aspects of bereavement that themselves require support?
Absolutely, and not just coronial processes. And it's one of the principles, as we talked about being keeping the things that principle 4, the things that someone must do after a death, being simple and straightforward. That yes, it is concerning that there are delays to death certification, and support through death certification and other processes being really important. But it's also important that people are supported through issues like closing bank accounts, addressing kind of legacy social media accounts, all of those things that can contribute to that sense of enormous amounts of pressure with dealing with process following a bereavement. All of that requires some support.
But you can't even get to that stage without a death certificate.
No, fair point.
And do I understand it? I'm sorry, I haven't really followed this sufficiently closely, but do I understand a lot of the new rules about death certification have come in as a result of the Shipman inquiry?
I don't know, I'm afraid.
Just taking that one step further, if those sorts of pressures are left unresolved and unaddressed, can that also link to more complicated and complex grief being suffered?
Absolutely. If those, yes. And both in the short and in the long term, as you say.
Thank you. Number 8, the experiences and needs of people experiencing homelessness. You tell us at paragraph 208 that the oral evidence received by the Commission revealed that homeless people commonly experience bereavement intersected with other trauma and health problems, making it especially hard for them to cope. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely.
And then finally, number 9, the experiences and needs of people in prisons. The inquiry heard a significant amount of evidence about this last week. And you tell us at paragraph 209, respondents highlighted that many bereaved prisoners, including those bereaved following the death of another inmate, faced an environment in which it was difficult for them to express their grief and display vulnerability. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Thank you. So now that we have looked at the disparities in terms of how people experienced grief and bereavement, let's look, please, at what would lead to a more positive experience of bereavement. And you set out in your report 4 areas that need to be considered. Number 1, access to holistic end-of-life care. This is at paragraph 223. Can you talk us through what you mean by this, please?
Having access to, again, going back to, this isn't about just one form of support. This is about a holistic recognition of the needs of people following a bereavement and engaging with all aspects of that in an appropriate way to respond to their individual needs. So for some people that might be around financial support, for some people that might be around emotional support, for other people it might be about process-related support through death administration, but providing that holistic care is what's most important.
Thank you. Number 2, this is at paragraph 224, good communication with professionals.
Yes, and again, going back to the principles from the Commission, this wasn't just about professionals with whose specialism is specifically around provision of bereavement support, but making sure that all professionals encountering somebody with bereavement experience are well supported. So that includes making sure that professionals working in HR in a workplace, and actually all people working in a workplace, are appropriately supported to support a colleague, making sure that bank staff are appropriately have the knowledge and training that they need to communicate effectively with people who face bereavement. Thinking holistically again about the different professionals that encounter bereaved people and ensuring appropriate support is provided.
Thank you. Number 3, contact with the dying person. Did you find that both individual and organisational respondents emphasised the value and importance of contact with the person around the time of death and the role of this and the role that that played in a good death and good grieving?
Absolutely, and again embodied in Principle 3 about being well supported through the death. I think one of the hesitations of the Commission was about thinking about bereavement support and bereavement experience as something that only starts after the point of mortality, after the point at which somebody has died. We need to think what sometimes can be referred to as kind of perimortally, through the point of death and beyond, about providing appropriate support both before the bereavement, through effective palliative care and engagement with the household members through their pre-grief experiences, through the point of... Sorry.
No, that's all right.
Through the point of death and on into the longer term as well.
Thank you. We will hear over the next couple of days from impact witnesses, many of whom have made reference in their witness statements to communicating virtually with their loved ones whilst they were in hospital and before they died. And of course, we know that during the pandemic, there were severe restrictions on contact. And the inquiry will hear about the differing experiences that were taking place, depending on what level of contact was being permitted and how that was taking place. And finally, collective grieving and funerals. Did the Commission hear that funerals and memorialisation can play a critical role in bereavement as a chance to publicly acknowledge a death, collectively express grief and celebrate someone's life?
Absolutely, and that's, as you rightly noted, the not just about funerals, but memorialisation more generally, and also perhaps, how best to put it, not just recognition of the individual death, but a recognition of dying and death more generally, and a memorialisation of loss, and a recognition and engagement with loss as a common shared experience.
At paragraph 228, you say this: while the pandemic in many ways impacted on funerals negatively, some respondents felt that adaptations and innovations introduced in this period should be maintained as an option going forwards, as they were more accessible for some people. What did you hear about that?
Yeah, so and you mentioned that for some people facing visiting restrictions prior to a death could also be a challenge, and this similarly applies to that period as well. But there were more or different options for how people could communicate, contact, engage with somebody either before the point of death or afterwards, were for people who would otherwise have found it difficult to engage with traditional options, opened up some more ways of engaging. So for somebody living at a great distance, obviously through the course of the pandemic, travel just wasn't possible. But actually, in some circumstances, they may not have been able to travel anyway, whether the pandemic was there or not. And for those people, actually being able to, for example, be involved in a funeral by video link could actually have been a good thing that opened up an opportunity for engagement that wouldn't otherwise have been available.
Thank you. I'm going to look now at the work that the Commission has done in securing what are described as 6 key national changes that took place in the 2 years following the report being published, so between 2022 and 2024. And this is set out at paragraph 80 of your report. But before I do that, can you just give the inquiry an idea as to how many people or organisations took part in the Commission's work between the time that it was set up in June of 2021 through the time that the report was published in 2022 and then up until the present day, because we are also going to come and talk for a moment about the update report from 2024.
Of course. So we held a survey took oral evidence, held round tables across all 4 UK nations. We had 1,119 adult respondents from our call for written evidence, had 99 respondents from responses from children and young people for the children's consultation. We had 130 responses from professionals through an organisational survey conducted as part of the inquiry. And we also had engagement from 31,000 students from a discrete piece of work that was done by an organisation called Votes for Schools as part of the Commission's work. We also... No, sorry, I'll leave it there.
All right, thank you. So the key national changes that took place between 2022 and 2024, you note that the first of those was in relation to the eligibility criteria for social security benefits for parents of bereaved children, which had been extended. The second is that the UK government has reviewed the gov.uk web pages on bereavement and bereavement support to facilitate access to key information. Number 3, that the National Institute for Health Research has commissioned a major study into equitable bereavement support for people of all ethnicities. I think you've made reference to that already. Has that report yet been published, do you know?
No, I don't think the report's been published just yet.
So that's still ongoing. Number 4, the UK government contributed £500,000 of funding towards a UK-wide day of reflection in 2024 to remember those who died or were bereaved during the pandemic. Number 5, that the Northern Ireland government introduced a new dedicated bereavement support website. And number 6, the new National Bereavement Support Services standards have been published. What are those?
There were a set of standards that was. Sorry, I've just lost track a second.
I think it's at paragraph 80. I really wanted to know who the National Bereavement Support Service standards were published by.
I'm going to need to reflect back on that.
All right,
sorry.
Perhaps you can let us know. And then you go on to talk about the additional improvements and changes that have been made since the follow-up progress report was published in 2024. Why was there a progress report published, and how did that come about?
Well, we felt that it was incredibly important that the work of the Commission, the purpose of the Commission was about securing change for people affected by bereavement.
Yes.
The work mustn't stop with the publication of a report that would then just sit on a shelf and go dusty, but actually make sure that change was delivered as a result of that, not just through the work of the steering group members and kind of follow up with key decision makers through them, but actually the work of all charities or individuals who wanted to engage with the work of the Commission and continue to drive the work forwards. So as part of that, we thought it's really important we produced a follow-up report about the progress that was that had been made, engage with the former commissioners around that, bring them up to date, and reflect again on what further areas, but both on what had changed and what had been done, but also on what further progress was needed and what new things needed to be particularly prioritised from the report.
All right, and you list at paragraph 81 a further 9 changes that have taken place since that follow-up report was published. Do you want to take us through those, please?
The UK government introduced, I think it is now, as a result of the Employment Rights Bill, a new right to bereavement leave for employees bereaved of a close relative. We saw the Northern Ireland Bereavement Network supported the Department of Health on a new bereavement charter. We had the Northern Ireland Health Minister committed to start planning process for development of a new bereavement strategy for Northern Ireland. The Welsh Government is now developing a bereavement care pathway for children and young people that's due in 2025. The UK Government's introducing the facility for people to register a death online. We had a change in the Renters' Rights Now Act, I think, which protects private renters from eviction because of their bereavement. And similarly in Scotland, we had legislation introduced protecting bereaved social tenants from eviction within the first 6 months of bereavement. And Department for Education has published new statutory guidance which includes reference to death and grief as part of life, so ensures that there is some reflection on death, dying and bereavement as part of the curriculum.
Thank you. The National Bereavement Support Service standards, I can tell you, were produced by the National Bereavement Alliance, and they have been developed with a wide range of stakeholders, including managers and practitioners of bereavement services, those with lived experience of bereavement, and those from underserved communities. And my lady, we will provide you with a copy of those standards. Thank you. So finally, Dr. Royston, you go on at the conclusion of your witness statement to talk about further work that can be done and should be considered, and lessons that we can learn from this pandemic. The overarching point that you make is that a whole systems approach to bereavement is vital, and you say that there must be leadership within government departments. And those leaders should sit across all national government, and there should be an understanding within each government department that bereavement is something which affects everybody, and it's an important issue that must not be lost sight of. You also say that there is a need for further grief education across all of government and across all of society, and that bereavement training requirements for education, for employment, and for third sector organisations, it is also something that should be encouraged and thereafter, once it's in place, reviewed regularly. Anything else that you'd like to add?
There are a couple of specific things. You draw attention to the need for that holistic support.
Yes.
And actually, if there was one core recommendation from the Commission, it was that there should be a cross-government bereavement strategy. And we still don't have a cross-government bereavement support strategy. We do now have a cross-government in England. We've got a cross-government working group around bereavement support that brings together different departments across government to consider bereavement support, but I would say we still don't have a clear bereavement support strategy in this country, and that feels like it is a notable omission at the moment. At the same time, there are a couple of other areas where progress is needed. So NICE have not produced guidance on bereavement support, and we would like to see clear guidance provided on how services should be supporting people affected by bereavement. It was good that they explored it, but we still don't have that guidance produced, and we'll want to continue to push for that. And the other key thing, and it goes back to the issue of death administration, is one of the things the Commission heard very positively from many respondents was about the Tell Us Once service, which coordinates across government so that following a bereavement, you only need to tell one government department rather than tell every government department about your bereavement experiences. And actually, we heard from a number of respondents very good things about that service. However, it's limited because it only applies to the public sector and doesn't include private companies. And one of the Commission's recommendations was that that should be extended to private companies as well, so that people don't have to tell, as well as telling government, don't have to tell their bank, don't have to tell their housing provider, don't have to tell their insurer, all of those different agencies they'd otherwise need to be in contact with. If they could all be brought within Tell Us Once, they only have to tell their story once, significantly reducing the complexity of those processes. So that would be a key step forward that could be taken to improve deaf administration.
Can I just ask how that would work, Dr. Royston? So tell us once, so you can understand how you can link up public sector departments, because sometimes they occasionally have IT that talks to each other, but not always. But how do you then have a system whereby bank, utility companies, how do you get them all linked? Does it need development of a more sophisticated app? How do you do it?
It would require some kind of data sharing approach, so that at the point at which the person told government, they were also able to have their private company providers notified as well. So it would require some data sharing. It would require some systems in order to support that. But I don't see a technical reason why it couldn't be done in principle. We do have circumstances such as, I know, for example, where people apply now, I think, for certain forms of fuel energy support. Government will liaise with their energy provider in order to ensure that that support is provided. So there isn't a fundamental distinction which makes it impossible for government to communicate with the private sector. It's just getting those processes to work better, I think.
I was just thinking, funnily enough, I've recently been making a list of my utility account numbers for my sons. Wouldn't you need to have a system whereby you had the account number for the utility company or the bank account number? Because otherwise a private sector organisation is going to be saying, well, wait a minute, I've got 2 Heather Halletts, poor things. Anyway, wouldn't you need more to be able to link all these things up?
Yeah, you might. You wouldn't necessarily need a account number, though you could ask people to provide that, I suppose. A postcode might work, for example. I think, I've got a feeling they're doing so there is a thing in the amongst utility companies, or energy companies specifically, called the Priority Services Register, so that vulnerable consumers can be added to the Priority Services Register to be prioritised. For example, if somebody's severely disabled and there's a power outage, they're prioritised for support. That Priority Services Register is, I think there's now work being done to share that between utility companies, so it's not just the energy company but also the water company and so on are aware that somebody is on the Priority Services Register. So I think that can be addressed, recognise that there are some challenges of doing so, but I don't see a fundamental reason why it couldn't be, and certainly we'd like to see it explored.
My lady, where there's a will, I'm sure there's a way. Dr. Royston, thank you very much. That completes my questioning, and I don't think there are any other questions.
Dr. Royston, thank you very much indeed for your help to the inquiry. I see you're a co-founder of the Commission. I'm not going to embarrass you by asking whose primary idea it was to come up with the Commission, but it sounds as if it's been a very worthwhile project. So thank you to you and your colleagues, all of whom set it up and then carried out all the research. It's been extremely helpful and a very interesting afternoon. Dreadful subject, obviously, but very interesting. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Very well, break now, and I shall return at 25 past.
Thank you, my lady.
All rise. Ms. Kazamani.
My lady, we are now going to hear from the next 2 witnesses for today, Mr. Langford and Ms. Arnott Barron. Mr. Langford is the representative for Cruise, and Ms. Arnott Barron is the representative for Cruise Scotland. Mr. Langford is here in person with us today, and Ms. Arnott Barron attends remotely. Please can the witnesses be sworn?
repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
Lovely, thank you. And Miss Arnott Barron, can you hear me?
Just.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you very well.
It's all right, I can.
Can you?
Can hear you.
Okay, that's fine. I'm now going to take you through the affirmation. Could you repeat after me, please?
Sure.
I do solemnly,
I do solemnly,
sincerely and truly
sincerely and truly,
declare and affirm
I declare and affirm
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth.
That's lovely, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Langford first. Thank you for attending to give evidence today. You've provided a witness statement to Module 10 of the inquiry, and that is dated the 18th of December 2025. That should be in front of you.
Yes.
The reference number for the record is INQ 000-659-963. And Mr. Langford, are you able to please confirm that that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I can confirm.
I'm grateful. And Ms. Arnott Barron, can you see and hear me? Apologies, I should have checked that before.
Yes, can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you for also attending to provide evidence today. You've similarly provided a witness statement to this module of the inquiry, and your statement is dated the 8th of January 2026. Do you have that in front of you?
Yes.
I'm grateful. And the reference number is INQ 000-660033. And again, the same question to you. Are you please able to confirm that the statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, I confirm.
Thank you. Mr. Langford, I'll turn first to you, and if I may, run through your professional background and your time at Cruise quite quickly. Mr. Langford, you produced this statement in your capacity as the Clinical Director of Cruise Bereavement Support, that's right?
Yes.
I'll refer to it as Cruise from now on for both of our sakes. That's a role that you've held since 2020?
That's correct.
And before this, you held 2 roles at Cruise. Are you able to tell me what those roles were, please?
Yes, so firstly, a Director of Operations nationally with Cruise, and then as Chief Operating Officer.
And how many years have you been at Cruise in total?
So I started at Cruise in 2015 in late August.
Grateful. And as for Cruise itself, you say in your statement at paragraph 18 that its mission is that you support people through one of the most painful times in life. So that's with bereavement support, information, and campaigning. And we can see from the history that you set out of Cruise that that's always been at the core of Cruise's work. So just very briefly on the history of your organisation. I won't take us through the various name changes over the decades, but you explain that the organisation was incorporated in 1959 and then registered as a charity in 1962.
That's correct.
And it was, in fact, initially established from the front room of your founder, Margaret Torrey. You explain in your statement that she set up what was called Cruise Clubs. So those were safe spaces for widows to talk about their grief and to seek support from one another.
That's correct.
And then later on in the 80s, we see that Cruise begins to support widowed men as well as widowed women. Mm-hmm. And then by the end of the 1980s, Cruise is extending its support to all bereaved people. And then in April 2001, we have the Scottish branches of Cruise, and they formally separate from Cruise. So up until this point, it's all 4 nations, and then we have Scotland sort of separate. That takes me quite nicely onto you, Ms. Arnott Barron. You're here today in your capacity as the CEO of Cruise Scotland.
Yes.
Is that right? And you have held that role since 2022, correct?
Yes.
And prior to that, you were the Chief Operating Officer. But you've in fact been at Cruise for a number of years, since 2002. as you told me earlier today.
Yes, that's correct.
And the mission of Cruise Scotland is very similar to the mission of Cruise, exactly. Ms Arnott-Barron, can I ask, just for the stenographer, that instead of nodding, perhaps you say yes or no, or I entirely disagree with you, Ms Kasmali, but a statement nonetheless, just so the stenographer can get that down.
Yes. No problem.
I'm grateful, thank you. And I understand that Cruise Scotland has 5 key strategic aims. You set those out in your statement.
Yes, that's correct.
Are you able to very briefly tell the inquiry what those strategic aims are at a very high level?
So sustainability, that's financial and environmental, positive bereavement health, obviously bereavement services, equalities, diversity and inclusion. And Jinx, it's like mastermind. I've just went right out my head to the last one there. I'm so sorry.
I believe it's at paragraph 5 of your statement.
Yep, sorry. Influencing, sorry.
Grateful. Today, I'd like us to focus on the bereavement services that you mentioned, a core component of Cruise's mission. And let's start from the very beginning of the pandemic, if we may. And I'll stay with you for the time being, Ms Arnott-Barron. You speak about the outset of the pandemic, and you address that at paragraph 13 of your witness statement. And you say, quite interestingly, that waiting lists were not an issue for Cruise Scotland at the outset of the pandemic. At face value, that is actually perhaps quite a surprising comment. Are you able to tell the inquiry why you consider that to be the case?
Absolutely. So that was very unusual for us, absolutely. So I think the assumption was that people just assumed that the services were closed because, let's face it, so many others were closed. Our helpline did remain open. And so we just used that opportunity to connect with clients who were already on our waiting list and used our resources that way. However, it was fairly short-lived, I would say, for about 3 months until people realised that we were still there and we didn't look back.
Yes, and we'll come on to the various sort of additional needs that were placed on services like yours during the course of the pandemic. But what you say, in fact, accords with what we have heard, or what the inquiry has heard over the course of this module from other services as well. So you say other people assumed that other services were closed, and we've heard that from some of those speaking to mental health operations as well. What you say also accords with what the inquiry has heard through its own roundtable exercise. And I know that the both of you were in fact sent a copy of the roundtable summary report on bereavement. There were, I don't need to sort of explain what it is to you, there were representatives from both organisations there. And the views of Cruise and Cruise Scotland are both reflected in the report. But nonetheless, I'd like to turn up a particular paragraph from that report, if I may. You're ahead of me. For the record, INQ 0005888 201, and that's at page 19, and it is in fact already ahead of me. So there we have a quotation from the National Bereavement Alliance, but before that, we see that the findings of the summary of the report were as follows. Bereavement support organisations saw a drop-off in referrals in the early stages of the pandemic. They suggested several reasons for this, including, and as you say, Ms Arnott-Barron, people assuming that services would not be available, people not having privacy in their homes, and some people not having the skills or confidence with technology to access support. Other people did not have access to the internet or devices such as laptops or tablets. But then we see a quotation from the National Bereavement Alliance, and that, in fact, entirely accords with what you've just told us, both in terms of timescale, the 3-month process, the 3-month period, and more generally in terms of the drop-off in waiting lists. A number of support services saw a drop-off in referrals in April, May, and June 2020, partly because people were reluctant to access support or didn't think that there would be access to the support. So that chimes with what you've told us today. Mr Langford, this isn't a point that you've addressed in your statement. Would you say that that accords with the experiences of crews in England, Wales and Northern Ireland?
It absolutely accords with the experiences that bereaved people have told us. In addition to this, several people told us that what they'd found is that they were trying to address their own immediate needs, the immediate needs of their family, the people they were caring for, the children that they were caring for as well. Yeah. And so those very immediate needs often meant that people put aside their own emotional needs and difficulties in an effort to try and support those that they love, whilst clearly having the burden of grief as well, and then contacting us afterwards when there was an opportunity to do so.
So they were dealing with the immediate urgency of the situation before them?
Absolutely.
The next topic that I'd like to turn to, which relates, in fact, entirely with what you've just told us, are the adaptive measures that both of your organisations had to take in order to provide those bereavement services during the pandemic. And I'd like to stay at the very beginning of the pandemic, so we're still at the outset. And again, turning to you, Ms Arnott Barron, this is something that you discuss at paragraph 10 of your statement. So you say that during the COVID-19 pandemic, Cruise Scotland continued to provide bereavement support services with only a small break of 10 days in March 2020 to attend to logistics. I mean, 10 days is a very impressive time for that shift. But can I ask what you mean by logistics, please?
Sure. So the logistics were Attend Anywhere software, and that's used by the NHS in Scotland. And we were fortunate enough to have had that in place for people that couldn't access services in person before the pandemic. So that was a huge a positive for us, because really it was already there, and we just had we trained people up in how to use it, because it was just a now and again rather than standard use. I would say we had more logistical challenges around the online support, because that needed quite a bit of training, which wasn't already in place. And I would also say a bit of confidence from our volunteers as well. So that took a bit longer to get in place.
And in fact, that's very helpful that you mentioned that. I'll just jump ahead and turn to the roundtable where we speak about the upskilling of volunteers, or rather, Cruise spoke about the upskilling of volunteers. So that is INQ 000588201, page 19 again. And there we have the quotation from Cruise Bereavement Support. I believe that was another member of your organisation, Mr Langford, where it said there were some real challenges, the rapid shift. So that is talking, as you say, Ms Arnott Barron, about that shift from sort of occasional online services to sort of essentially it being the modus operandi, as it were. Cruise is primarily volunteer delivered, was very local and face-to-face, and moved to virtual using technology that was new to us, upskilling thousands of volunteers. That can be tricky at the best of times, again, chimes with what you've said. So at speed, that's harder. Mr Langford, are you able to elaborate on tricky? What was difficult?
Absolutely. So we have, and at the time had, approximately 3,500 volunteers across England, Northern Ireland and Wales, with a staff team that is comparatively small. So probably around 120 people, but not full-time equivalent. So moving everyone over to consistent, good quality practice that the bereaved people need in terms of excellent support is hard. That's hard to get sort of quality, but also we have to bear in mind that many of those volunteers were themselves also facing difficulty. Yes. Many faced bereavement themselves. Many were also caring for elderly relatives and also their own children, and trying to adapt their own lives as well. So each volunteer was juggling their own unique experiences, whilst also trying to serve bereaved people in the very best way possible.
And did you find, for example, that the number of volunteers increased, decreased? You had a shift in your composition of volunteers, perhaps? Or did the difficulties that you were talking about impact your volunteer resources?
It did indeed. So we found that volunteers that clearly had their own personal priorities to deal with, needed to take a break or needed to focus and thus leave crews, and which is entirely understandable. Others, what we found is that other people wanted to solely support people on a face-to-face, in-person basis. Clearly that wasn't possible at the time. But however, what we did find is that many volunteers, new volunteers joined us who wanted to give, wanted to support people at the time of national crisis, but also wanted to provide support on the phone and felt they were able to do so, and with the right training were able to. So some parts of our service increased. So like the helpline increased from around 30 to 40 volunteers to over 100.
Ms Arnott Barron, is there anything that you would like to add to that from the perspective of Crew Scotland?
No, there's lots of similarities.
Grateful. And that, in fact, leads us very nicely on to my next set of questions, as it were, which is what bereavement support looked like during the pandemic. If I take us to paragraph 30 of your statement, you say you've set out a high-level overview of the specific roles that crews played during the pandemic. And then you say, we provided bereavement support throughout the period from the 1st of January 2020 to the 28th of June 2022. That is, of course, because that is the relevant period for this module of the inquiry. And then some lines further down, you speak of what we've just been discussing. So you say, to meet increased need for bereavement support due to the nature of the COVID-19 pandemic and associated rising mortality rates, we expanded our volunteer recruitment activities, as we've just discussed, increased provision on the national helpline, as we've just discussed, sourced additional funding to open new services. And then you say the largest initiatives were an online video support service covering all geographical areas where we did not have a local branch, a synchronous written chat service provided by qualified counsellors, and online psycho-educational groups to help people gather, learn more about grief, and learn how to cope. And then later on, a few paragraphs later at paragraph 40, you add that you diversified your training offer to companies, organisations, and other services. And I'd like to delve into that in a little bit more detail, if I may. So we've already discussed the helpline. We've discussed that the provision of the helpline expanded, essentially. Are you able to tell me a little bit more about the extent to which it expanded? So you've said that the number of volunteers you had over the phone increased. Any other expansions?
So in terms of the helpline?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So we expanded with our volunteers numbers, as previously indicated. And what of course became apparent very, very quickly is people needed support there and then as soon as they contacted us. Any wait is too long. So with increasing our volunteer cohort, it meant that we could provide more people with telephone support, which is the core of the helpline activity. Yep. It was and still is to this day. And also we increased our email response, which is part of the helpline too. Okay. So what that meant is we could field more queries and often requests where people wanted some bereavement support, but also some advice about accessing other organisations too for other needs, and that was more possible through email.
And was that something that Crews did before in terms of acting as that signpost to other services? Yeah, absolutely, throughout our services, particularly what we find was and is the case with email too. And you also discuss one-to-one support that Crews provided to bereaved individuals. Again, a service that existed prior to the pandemic, but took on, is it fair to say, a new shape, form and quantity during the pandemic? Very much. So leading up to the pandemic, it was, or rather leading up to the first lockdown, should I say, it became very clear that in-person support, which Crews has traditionally delivered through decades, was not going to be possible, and we didn't know how long that would not be possible for. So we already started making some preparations to shift over to more remote options. We started training our volunteers predominantly in telephone support, providing one-to-one over the phone, but then also looked at opportunities for video support.
clearly in those early days, what we had to take into account of was that not many people were confident in using video support. So we stuck to mainly telephone, increasing the capacity around telephone support, and then experimented with video as people continue to grow in confidence and also accessibility.
And focusing for a second on the confidence point, that's something that actually comes up later in your statements. It's a point that I find personally very fascinating. It sounds like we think about it in terms of in-person shift to virtual shift, but it's more nuanced than that. It's in-person to phone to increase confidence with video, as you've just said. Do you have any reflections on why that might be the case? Where did that increased confidence come from?
Absolutely. The basis of this, well, we find this all the time at Cruise, really, and it's entirely understandable, is that when we are very, very vulnerable, as is often the case with a bereavement, which is why people contact us, then we tend to need to be supported in a way that we trust, in a way that we feel is acceptable and that is as familiar as it can be for us. Unfamiliarity at that point can feel very destabilising for many people. And so that confidence in having a means of talking to someone is vital. And most of us still use the phone in order to do so. And also most of us have access to the phone. Video, a bit more difficult for many people, particularly in more rural communities. What they feed back to us and say is that access to Wi-Fi, a decent internet connection, is difficult. And so phone was also more accessible.
And that ties in to some of the points we'll come on to in relation to digital exclusion as well, and different groups' accessibility to different forms of digital means. You speak also about a synchronous written chat service. Are you able to tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we provided the synchronous chat service Cruise Chat through additional funding in the interim, which was really helpful. And we were able to support thousands of people through that. So that would be a qualified counsellor who'd be supporting any number between 1 and 3 people optimally over synchronous chat at any one time. And sometimes chats could last for, I believe, around 20 minutes.
And just on that as well, and I appreciate this isn't actually something that's touched upon in your statement, did you find that the demographics of those you were able to reach through those virtual means were different to those that you'd previously been able to reach in person?
It's a really important question. I have to rely on memory. There was more variety, more diversity in those, absolutely, both in age, also ethnicity.
Similarly, you talk about online psycho-educational groups. Tell me more about those.
Yes, so we call them Understanding Your Bereavement Online. And that's where bereaved people will meet, usually in a group of between 12 up to 20 people. And some trained volunteers, often a staff member, will oversee. And we'll meet for an hour. We'll talk through what it's like to be bereaved, some common experiences. Essentially then, options for coping for yourself, how you can support others, and then how to seek more support from ourselves and also other organisations if need be. And then what we've developed also alongside that is an opportunity for a short peer support experience online afterwards.
Tell me more about that peer support experience.
Yeah, so that's where we would tend to then have participants in breakout rooms, and you can opt in or opt out if you like. And then they can have some support from each other, but also from a trained volunteer who'd be facilitating that small group. So those small groups are generally split off to between 3 to 6 people from the larger group.
And you're speaking of training volunteers within your organisation, but another limb of the support that Cruise provided, as I understand from your statement, is providing training and advice to other non-bereavement specialist organisations. Are you able to tell me more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of the research points towards many of us, the best support we can get and the most accessible support we can get is actually from our immediate communities, our families, friends, workplaces, other places with whom we have contact with, educational establishments, often non-bereavement support organisations. And so we have, for for many years prior to COVID, provided training to organisations around bereavement awareness. So what within their role they can provide around having a compassionate conversation with people who are bereaved, whether they be their clients, customers, employees or volunteers.
And you say, leading on from that, at your statement at paragraph 45, that those organisations or delivery partners are predominantly local authorities, private sector finance companies, educational providers, health trusts, faith-based organisations and other voluntary sector organisations. That's quite a broad remit.
Lots of people need help, and it's a conversation we believe everyone can have and we can be prepared for.
Ms Arnott-Barron, turning to you on that note, and this is a very wide question. We've heard a lot from Mr Langford about what Cruse was doing in terms of the provision of specific services. Was Cruse Scotland carrying out similar activities during the pandemic?
Yeah, we didn't do it all at the same time. That wasn't all synchronised, but yes, we've done similar with the training, and a lot of what Mr Langford has said, yeah, we absolutely resonate with. So yeah, it's another really great way of reaching more people.
I'd like to turn now to the efficacy of digital support vis-a-vis in-person support. And that's something that you both touch on and is hugely important in a context where the type of support that you are practically able to provide is changing. I'll turn to you first, Ms Arnott-Barron. Was your experience that remote bereavement support was equally effective, less effective, more effective than in-person support that you had provided prior to the pandemic?
I think if you'd asked me beforehand, what would I have thought? I would have thought in person is, far superior, but actually the research shows no, it is as effective by phone or online. And yeah, that's not just within Cruse and Cruse Scotland, but yeah, wider that has been evidenced, and yeah, we are seeing the benefits of that.
And in fact, now you tend to operate on hybrid models, don't you?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mr Langford, would you agree with that?
Absolutely, we'd agree. We found that evidence to be the same. One of the important aspects, though, for bereaved people, and people tell us this through their evaluations, is the importance of having the right information up front, but also having the right choice. So many people come to us, and certainly did, even during the pandemic, asking if it was possible to meet with someone in person, and understandably so. Many people lacked companionship and wanted to be close to people. But actually being informed about how telephone support and sometimes video support can be useful, often that conversation helped in advance to help people feel like they could trust the service.
And in fact, that goes exactly to one of the points you make later on in your statement. So that falls with, so taking a step back to the bucket of digital exclusion, as it were, you say that you were acutely aware of the prospect of, and actuality of digital exclusion, which is what you've just been saying. And then you say, and this is at paragraph 49 of your statement, that Cruse made the strategic decision to continue providing both remote telephone support and online video support to bereaved people requiring ongoing sessions on a weekly basis. And to my mind, it sounds like that chimes with what you've just said, which is giving people the agency to choose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important. A lot felt out of control for people, and so it was important to have some control over the support they could receive.
Was that? Did you find that impacted how you trained your volunteers, for example? Did you train them in both mediums, or how did that work practically?
We started off training everyone in telephone support because it was the most accessible and available at the time, and then rolled out video support in a gradual basis, logistics allowing, really. But also the other element I would add is the training of people who were undertaking initial conversations with bereaved people coming to us, predominantly on the helpline, but also locally, because then they were having the conversations with people to talk with them about what choices are available. And that conversation needs to be handled really delicately, compassionately, really well, to help people understand what choices are on the table for them.
Ms Arnott-Barron, does that reflect the experiences of Cruise Scotland?
Yeah, and I would say just one thing that really helped, because we had several clients who were mid-session, if you like, when first lockdown happened. The volunteers were really worried about leaving people partly supported, if you like, and it was them who were saying, could I connect with them by phone instead? And so that happened quite organically, and then that was encouraging other people that actually this would work as well. So we used to have meetings of the different volunteer groups kind of throughout the pandemic, and they could share some of their learning and things, and that really helped quite a lot too.
And that, in fact, chimes with what we've been saying about upskilling volunteers. So it's sort of a volunteer-driven upskilling as well as a sort of organisation-driven upskilling, as it were.
Absolutely.
Mr Langford, you also talk about your work with other organisations to mitigate some of the impact of digital exclusion. And you mention your partnership with Extracare. Are you able to tell the inquiry a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had 3-year and then it was expanded to 5-year funding to provide support to bereaved people in retirement villages and care and nursing homes that were run by Extracare. So predominantly in the Midlands, but also stretching through into Buckinghamshire. And at the time, at the start, it was face-to-face. We were also training staff and volunteers in their facilities. Of course, then when the pandemic lockdowns hit, we moved everything to be as remote as possible, well, entirely remote, particularly considering those facilities needed to be completely locked down because of the vulnerability of people who were residing in them. So what we did then was organise, as much as possible, remote group activities where people together could learn how to particularly engage on video support so that they wouldn't feel alone and isolated. And what we commonly find is a large room where people were socially distanced on individual devices or learning with each other with 1 or 2 of our volunteers or staff online, whilst also then they'd have some care home or nursing home staff available too.
And in fact, Ms Arnott-Barron, that links to one of the initiatives that you talk about in your statement as well. So you talk about the different groups who were impacted to more or less of an extent by digital exclusion. And I'll in fact read it out. So you say at paragraph 17 that despite Cruise Scotland being able to implement telephone and online support quickly, it was not without its challenges and unfortunately did not meet the needs of everyone who needed their support. The communities most affected were those who did not have access to or an independent understanding of technology, those without private space within the home, and those who needed the support of a third party to refer or accompany them to support. These tended to be those whose first language was not English, children and young people, which the inquiry has considered in the previous module, those with a learning difficulty, and those with additional support needs such as hearing or sight loss. And then a few paragraphs down, you talk about the difficulties that older clients face, so including those in nursing homes and care homes. And you say at paragraph 21 of your statement that you weren't actually initially sure how to address that issue. And you became creative in your approach to this group. I quite liked that turn of phrase, actually. Are you able to tell me how you were creative?
Yeah, so we were funded to provide, it was groups for people who had become socially isolated because of their bereavement, and that tended to be older people that had perhaps been in a caring role for a long time. And, you know, people lose their connections with friends and to an extent family, and maybe even workplaces where that applied. So these were people that had kind of lost their confidence in connecting with others again. And before the pandemic, they met in person, would have kind of chats, we'd go out, have walking groups, things like that. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. Now, part of this, we could offer individual support, but the whole part of the group was to get people connecting and sharing. And it was actually myself that came up with the idea of a conference call. And I appreciate that some people may not know what that is because it's an older thing, but back certainly in the 1990s, it used to be if there was a group of people, before we had Teams and Zoom, we all used to dial into the same number and you would have an access code and then you could all speak on the same call. And that's actually what we ended up doing with that group. They did receive individual contact, particularly those that were living alone, but it meant they could still keep up the connection with each other, and it was a really lovely thing to have been able to have done.
And you say, in fact, that it was so popular that although it was initially a fortnightly call, you subsequently extended it to a weekly call.
Yes, absolutely.
Another group who were particularly impacted by the move to digital were those living in busy households, as you say. The key issue is they were unable to access private space in order to actually receive the bereavement support, be it by way of a telephone call or a video, even if they had access to the technology. In your experience, what tended to happen in those sorts of cases? What was the workaround?
Yeah, well, it is part of the contractual agreement that people do have private space, and of course most people want to have that in any case. So people could be creative. They would join calls from a car. We had one client that would have regular sessions from the caravan that was in their driveway. So there was lots of different ways that people could come up with things, and I think that was easier where you actually had a specified date and time for a session, but much more challenging for people just looking to hook in with Helpline or something like that.
So it's perhaps worked better for the one-to-one support sort of series over 6 weeks than the Helpline, for example?
I would say.
Ms. Arnott-Barron, you speak about another group as well who was particularly affected, those from ethnic minorities, particularly where language barriers were an issue. Both of you have been provided with the inquiry's listening exercise, Every Story Matters. I'd like to ask you some questions about this group, but before I do so, we could just turn up an extract from that listening exercise. Again, you're ahead of me, many thanks. INQ 000 659 894, page 0062, just for the record. And here we see that there was also mistrust of formal bereavement support services among people from some ethnic minority communities. They were concerned about the privacy of their information and preferred to seek support from within their local communities, where they felt a greater sense of security and better understanding of their culture. Now, I know that we've primarily been focusing on the practicalities of support provision, but is this something that you came across in Cruse Scotland's work?
Yeah, I guess for ourselves, it was more where there was a language, a barrier, if you like, because sometimes it would be support for referring in, but actually to have those sessions was quite complex to try and get somebody that was maybe in a busy household having sort of private time, if you like, for a call that matched alongside when the interpreter or translation service was available, alongside when the bereavement counsellor was free. So that was quite a challenge. I'm not sure I've answered your question.
I think, in fact, perhaps I'm answering my own question now, but to some extent you have. This is perhaps the preliminary step, because once somebody is accessing your services, perhaps this step has been overcome. I don't mean to speculate, though.
Yes, certainly. People referring in, because they can do that through email or through grief chat and things, that has been less of a barrier for ourselves in Scotland. And of course, Scotland is not as diverse as other parts of the UK as well. So I think that's been less problematic across the pandemic.
And as you say, it was perhaps more about ensuring that everybody could be available at the same time.
Yeah.
You also talk about individuals with additional support needs, such as hearing or sight loss, those with a learning difficulty and other disabilities. And you say that they also needed the support of a third party to refer or accompany them. Are you able to provide further detail about that, please?
Yes, so very different groups. So people with, obviously, with sight loss or needs around sight. The phone support was certainly accessible for them. Hearing was a real challenge, because whether that's online or whether that's by phone, that poses a huge barrier. So really the only option we had was the grief chat support, the kind of the web-based. And where that can offer an immediate response, it doesn't offer a counselling relationship. So that was definitely a group that we had to prioritise once we could meet in person. But until we could, they did miss out. For people with learning disabilities, very similar to the barriers with children and young people as well. It's having somebody there to support, to have the IT equipment and things all set up. And of course there's regulations around that as well. So that was a lot more trickier to navigate. And I would say that we didn't get the same number of referrals for that client group over that time. It wasn't until face-to-face was available again. So definitely impacted.
Mr. Langford, did that reflect your experiences as well with Cruse?
It absolutely did. And if I may add, our deepest concern is so often not who contacts us, but who doesn't.
Yeah.
And so much data would say that there are many groups that don't. But actually, we also, as a sector, have a responsibility to be accessible. And what we've managed to do partway through when lockdowns were there was a bit more flexibility, and a little bit afterwards, we've been able to source some funding to experiment more about actually growing up support from within communities and having a more co-produced approach, where it's more equitable. And what we've seen is that works well, and we trust familiarity, don't we? And there's a lot more to explore there, but that seems to break down some of those barriers that clearly have been there for people.
And in fact, that links quite well with the next question I'm going to ask you, which is about the additional need for bereavement support during a pandemic. Sounds pretty self-evident when I put it like that, but if we could turn to the round table, please. I'm sure it will be ahead of me, but INQ 000588201, and that's page 15. And this section deals with bereavement support and whether it was suitable for those suffering from a COVID-19 bereavement. And we have a quotation here which says, my sister got through to an organisation for bereavement. They said they would probably learn from her because they haven't had something like this. They later did workshops to find out what it, a sudden COVID-19 bereavement experience was like. And I think that chimes with what you're saying, learning sort of how to provide that support.
Well, absolutely. Of course, we were all learning at the time, and also all contending with our own difficulties too. But nevertheless, bereaved people need the support they need. And what was becoming apparent every day for us is that COVID-19 and the resulting lockdowns, partly they unearthed issues of intersectionality and multiple vulnerabilities that are more prevalent with some groups than others. It unearthed those that were there anyway, and also the nature of lockdowns and often the suddenness of a bereavement through COVID-19 meant that those vulnerabilities were compounded. And so often there was more complex, more prolonged experience of grief and also trauma as well.
And just on that exact point that you mentioned, it's a point that you both mention in your statements, actually. So you talk about the complexity of, the increased complexity of the needs with which you were being presented during the pandemic, and indeed continue to do so. The inquiry has also received written evidence from Dr. Harrop, and we've just heard from UKCB. She was involved with that project. And you've been provided with a copy of her statement today, in advance of today, apologies. She's conducted significant research on the exact points that you've just mentioned. And one of the findings that she references in her statement is that there was a relatively high finding of prolonged grief disorder during the pandemic. So she says that was 29% at 25 months indicated post-bereavement versus an expected level of 10% in non-pandemic times. I appreciate that you are both sort of working at the front line, as it were, but does that chime with your experiences and what you were seeing, I think?
Absolutely does.
Yeah. Ms. Arnott-Barron?
Yes, absolutely.
And just to follow up on that line of questioning, I'll turn to you first, Ms. Arnott-Barron. I'll give Mr. Langford a small break. Do you consider that there was sufficient training and expertise within the sector to address the specificity and complexity of grief in and by COVID-19?
Yes, I would say it's there.
Yeah.
Perhaps just not the volume.
Yeah.
And I think that volume of people with such complexity of grief usually isn't needed, because most people will respond well to a lower level response, more sort of listening support and things rather than counselling. So it was more, the volume that created a challenge. Certainly with Mr. Langford, he did mention the trauma, or possibly it was yourself, I'm sorry, but that was something that really featured with so many of the COVID deaths was trauma, and that does mean obviously, you know, a counselling response to support that.
So increased volume of that response, of the availability of that response.
Yeah, of that complex need.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ms. Langford, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I'd concur with what Ms. Arnott-Barron said. I would also say, to add, that it is partly about the sector, and so concur completely with what's already been said. Also, we exist in a system, and actually the knowledge about how to work with and treat and signpost for prolonged grief disorder is not well known. It's not universal within other support structures, and that includes statutory mental health. In some places, yes, but others not.
So actually, I'm asked to ask you the next question, but I'm going to extend it. So the question is, how can the sector ensure that such expertise would be available in a future pandemic? But feel free to answer that more widely.
Absolutely. So you've cited Dr. Emily Harrop's research, and we work with Dr. Harrop all the time. And and her colleagues, the research that she's cited here, it needs to be more well known. It needs to be more understood. And what we commonly find is that bereavement is often treated as in a similar way that people would treat depression or anxiety, but they're different. Yeah. They're different in the diagnostic manuals, and people who experience them need to be treated as such too.
Ms Arnott-Barron, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think Mr Langford's covered that rather well.
That leads us very nicely on to my last set of questions, which relate to the lessons learned during the pandemic. And you've both set this out in some detail in your written evidence already, and the inquiry is very grateful, and my lady will have regard to that written evidence. So for today's purposes, I'd like to simply highlight the key elements from that. I'll turn first to Mr Langford and, in fact, read out what I understand to be the key elements of those recommendations and lessons learned, and then if you'd like to comment. You say, firstly, increased preparedness for a national major incident could have elevated our adaptability as a sector. Secondly, an ongoing scoping of which parts of society are most in need could have facilitated for a highly targeted approach to provision. Thirdly, a more targeted approach to partnership working may have helped bereavement support charities reach those most in need of support. Fourthly, having more immediate public messaging that was adapted to the inherent changes of context could have further reduced distress by helping people better understand how they can support each other. Fifthly, associated professionals could have been targeted and trained on how to provide some level of bereavement support in response to needs arising from the pandemic. And finally, operating a sustainable financial model was a challenge, and additional funding for support organisations would have been available during the pandemic. And you then say, in fact, no, that is the end of, as I understand it, the end of those lessons learned. But if you have any further comments, please do share those.
Nothing further to add, actually.
Great. Ms Arnott-Barron, turning to you now. You set out similar impacts and learning points, as you refer to them, at paragraph 25 of your statement. And you say, firstly, that remote bereavement support for adults delivered via telephone and online platforms achieved outcomes comparable to face-to-face provision and should be regarded as an effective delivery model. Second, individuals with learning disabilities and those requiring translation or interpreter support indicated the need for tailored approaches for these groups. Third, and this is in fact a point that the inquiry will be considering with family organisations over the course of this week, restrictions on hospital visiting and funeral practices were associated with long-term negative impacts on bereaved individuals, underscoring the importance of balancing immediate risk management with longer-term harm. Fourth, volunteer capacity and motivation had a demonstrably positive impact on service continuity and organisational resilience during the crisis. Fifth, the voluntary sector's flexibility enabled more rapid service adaptation than was observed in many public and private sector organisations, offering transferable lessons for future emergency response. Sixth, opportunities to systematically capture and share evidence of effective organisational adaptation were limited, constraining sector-wide learning. Seventh, uniform PPE and pandemic protocols were not proportionate across all settings, and there was a resulting inefficient use of resources. Seventh, limited post-pandemic reflection and contingency planning reduced organisations' ability to consolidate learning and improve preparedness. And eighth, organisations that sustained adapted service delivery rather than suspending services contributed to improved organisational resilience and societal outcomes. I feel like I've just spoken a lot there, so is there anything that you would like to add?
Obviously, those were the key points that, really keen to bring out. I guess just the other thing to highlight is that bereavement support hasn't gone back to what it was pre-pandemic. We are still working with the results of the pandemic. It's still very alive in what people are presenting with, even if that's in a compare and contrast of a more recent bereavement. You know, I wish I could have done this for whoever died in the pandemic, because I think we keep speaking about this as though it's been a part in time that's happened and we've moved on, whereas actually I think for many of the bereaved it's actually still very alive.
Thank you. And thank you to the both of you for your evidence. My lady, those are my questions, but I understand there are now some questions from CPs.
There are. Thank you very much. Ms Morris is just there.
Thank you, my lady. Good afternoon, Mr Langford. Good afternoon, Miss Arnott-Barron. I ask questions on behalf of the COVID Bereaved Families for Justice UK. I'd like just to address you on one topic, please. That's addressing inequalities via data collection. I think it was yourself, Mr Langford, in your statement, the way you noted that Cruse doesn't keep or collect data on the stigma or cultural barriers to accessing bereavement support. So I wanted to ask you whether Cruse and Cruse Scotland agree with Dr Harrop's recommendation for the collection of client data to really analyse and understand some of those barriers as a foundation to then providing outreach to those communities.
We absolutely agree. We see it as an imperative. It's necessary, and we've made substantial changes already.
Okay. You foreshadowed my next question, which was, is data collection and analysis appropriate and sufficient at the moment? And if not, what further work needs to be done? Yeah,
absolutely. It's getting there, but there's a journey to be made. We see a significant way forward in organisations communicating with each other to get an understanding of what collectively there is of data that tells us who is accessing support and who is not. And also, not solely who is accessing support, but who is visible to an organisation and how visible organisations are to them. As I indicated before, some groups that concern us most are people we don't know about, who don't contact. And so that really worries us, and we'd be keen to understand more collectively with the sector.
Thank you. Is that part of the ongoing scoping and targeted outreach that you mentioned in your evidence a moment ago? Thank you. Miss Arnott-Barron, is there anything you'd like to add on behalf of Cruse Scotland in respect of data?
I agree with Mr Langford as well that it is about who's not coming forward and those questions of why. But I guess just another point is, I guess I recognise that even if other communities were stepping forward, I recognise that the offer that may not exist at the moment may be attractive or applicable to them. And yet I would like to be guided about actually what would be helpful and how we could address that. So yes, definitely agree with all that Dr Harrop says, and would appreciate any guidance on how we can improve on this.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you both. Thank you, my lady.
Thank you, Ms Morris. And Ms Beattie, no good to you up in Scotland, but Ms Beattie's over there.
My lady, the questions have actually been amply covered by Councillor Inquiry.
I wondered. Thank you very much, Ms Beattie. Thank you for your help. So you've already covered the questions that Ms Beattie had permission to ask for. Thank you both very much indeed for your help with the inquiry. I know people who were bereaved during the pandemic, and obviously during the course of the inquiry I've met, sadly, too many more. You don't need me to tell me how important the services your organisations offer are to the bereaved. So thank you for all that you did and continue to do to assist those. I think, was it the Cruse hit the most painful moment of their life? Very poignant mission, if I may say so. So thank you both, and please thank all of those your staff and the volunteers who also helped you. Thank you very much indeed. Very well, that completes the evidence for today. I shall return for 10 o'clock tomorrow. Thank you.